Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Yeshiva League Pass Faceoff. I'm your host, Josh Kass, and we are sponsored by the YLP Law Firm. For 16 years, you've entrusted Elliot with the growth and guidance of your kids, and now it's time to let him do the same for your family's most important asset, your home. Admitted in both New York and New Jersey, Elliot can help guide you through any residential or commercial purchase, sale, refinance, or lease with championship quality and award-winning care. If you're looking for your commercial coach or a new home is your goal, reach out to the Weiselberg Law Real Estate Services today at 917-952-2597, or you can send them an email. Just email wiselawesque@gmail.com. And I just want to remind everyone once again, that's the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely. So again, I'm going solo today, and as unfortunate as that may be for the topic that I have for you guys today, it's still going to be an exciting episode. Today, I am bringing you the championship preview and breakdown. So we have a doubleheader set to be played in Frisch this coming Sunday, March 10th. At the time of recording this, it is Wednesday night. So hopefully it's going to be two great games, and I'm going to break it all down for you between JV and Varsity, the matchups. We're going to go through it all, maybe get a prediction at the end. Stay tuned to find out what we have in store. So normally when I do these things, I start off with JV and I move to Varsity. However, because the Varsity game is taking place first on Sunday, I'm going to start with Varsity. So just want to let everyone know in advance, though, that the games are officially scheduled. JV set to start at 1:30 at Frisch. Varsity is set to start at 5:30, but obviously that might be impacted by how long the JV game takes, because last year both games went to overtime, and as a result, they were also in two different places, and it made it a little bit of a challenge to get started exactly on time. But with both games being played in the same location at Frisch this year, hopefully the overall, just the schedule will flow a little bit smoother. So we'll see what happens there. But let's start with Varsity. So in the Varsity Championship, we have the TABC Storm and the DRS Wildcats. Now, just to talk a little bit about how these teams have done during the regular season and up and throughout the playoffs. You're looking at the TABC Storm coming out of the Western Conference as the 1 seed. They were absolutely unbelievable all year long, cracked double digits on the win column again, and they really were almost unchallenged throughout the regular season. They had 2 losses on their regular season record, and yeah, I know it seems like, well, how is that really unchallenged? They lost to multiple teams, and I'm telling you guys that they were really almost unchallenged. I mean, one of those games was a bad game against DRS, and I understand, and, stay tuned, we're going to get to that. But for the other loss that they had on their regular season record, which was the game in Frisch, it was their third game of the year. They hadn't really gotten going yet. They did win their first 2 games, but really hadn't seen much of a challenge. Frisch is a tough place to play in. And when you're looking at that, they later went and just destroyed Frisch once they got to TABC. So with that being said, I think it's fair to say TABC really just wasn't very challenged throughout the regular season. Now, in the playoffs, they went and played the SAR Sting, or rather, they hosted the SAR Sting in the first round. The final score of that game was 5-2. Good game on both sides. But as a whole, you're looking at, this TABC team and saying, all right, well, we never really expected them to be given as much of a challenge against SAR this year, maybe, as opposed to the last year or two, because last year SAR knocked them out of the playoffs. But TABC got their revenge, beat the SAR Sting 5-2, advanced to the from the quarterfinals to the semifinals, played the Hank Hurricanes, and they actually ended up with a larger margin of victory against the Hank Hurricanes in the semis. They beat Hank 7-1. The score was 5-0 after the first period, and they went out there and really just showed that they wanted it and that nothing was going to stop them from getting back to the finals. So that has been the road for TABC in the playoffs and what they've gone through most recently, and a little bit about how their regular season sort of went. But other than that, I mean, they beat the likes of just about anyone that they faced, beat Hank in the playoffs, beat Kushner, beat Frisch, beat SAR, They were really and that's really, all the top talent that they faced all year long. And, also, the playoffs, you look at it, they've given up a total of 3 goals so far in 2 games, which is a pretty good average. When you do it mathematically, it's a goal and a half per game so far, and they're about to play a 3rd playoff game. It's going to be the championship game. On the other side, you have the DRS Wildcats, and the Wildcats have also had a very strong season. Their only blemish during the regular season was a 2-1 loss at HAFTR, and sometimes you're going to run into, a tough team to score against and a great goalie in Max Newmark. And that's really what it was for DRS. They were challenged. They couldn't find their game on offense. Defensively, they were good. They were very good, but they didn't have enough to get it done on the scoring chart. And with that being said, that is their one blemish on the season. But other than that, they swept Hank. They beat TABC 5-0 during the regular season in DRS. They beat Frisch. They beat Rambam. These are all teams that also went either deep into the playoffs, still are in the playoffs, or made it there and were really competitive teams. And you're looking at them really just also being unchallenged throughout the regular season and really up until this point. The closest game that they have played up until this point, they've had 2 1-goal games with Frisch if you include the playoffs, and they lost to HAFTR. But other than that, when they rebounded against HAFTR, they beat them 9-3. So showing that they really took a lot away from that first game they played against them when they lost 2-1 in HAFTR. And then when it flipped to DRS, they showed that it was still on their minds and they really wanted it back, and they wanted it badly. And with that being said, that has been really what their road has been like. They defeated Rambam in the first round of the playoffs. The final score of that game was 7-1, and they just beat Frisch in a nail-biter. Final score was 2-1 at DRS on this past Sunday. And it was a great game. I was there to witness it, let me tell you. But I also need to tell you that, I think DRS has been sort of humbled a little bit in knowing they haven't really been challenged throughout the regular season. And then they get a Frisch team that really was playing with house money compared to DRS. And DRS, they did win the game, and they did what they do best, which is defend. They gave up just 1 goal to a high-powered Frisch offense, but let it be known that Frisch did outplay them, and that was in DRS with the greenhouse crowd, as they like to say, and all their fans behind them. There were plenty of alumni there to watch it unfold, and let me tell you, it was such a great game, but it was so close that, it really could have been Frisch walking out of DRS as, the winner and heading into the championship. So DRS has, I would say, between these two teams, now if we're going to start comparing, has had the more difficult road, so to speak, getting to the finals. But let's talk about these teams and how they match up and a little bit about them individually now. So we'll start with the matchup that happened earlier on the year. On January 3rd, DRS played against TABC. The game took place in DRS. I already mentioned it was a 5-0 DRS win. And I'm looking at that coming into this game, and I'm saying to myself, well, that's a big one. It's not like it was a close game. TABC should feel like they have it all right now, that they can use it to their advantage and win this game. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be thinking like that at all. Obviously, that's what DRS did 2 years ago when they were on the losing side of the regular season match, and they were the ones who ended up winning the championship. But 5-0, and I was there. TABC had absolutely nothing in that game. Their offense went flat. Their defense had trouble defending, and Amichai Dresner got hung out to dry in net. It was shot after shot after shot, and all things considered, he had a really good game, but it was just a number of shots until he cracked, and eventually, once he cracked, it just kept getting worse for TABC. Now, we'll talk about what we're expecting going forward, and that's the following. First of all, the floor is flipped to a neutral site, and a site that TABC is more familiar with than that of DRS. It's in Frisch this year. That already gives TABC the knowledge advantage, the tactical advantage for their experience being there. However, it also plays a little bit towards DRS's strength, being that the gym is more similar to DRS the way the gym is laid out, the space, the size of the rink, or excuse me, the court, the way the boards play a factor, how the walls behind the net, or whatever it is behind the net, whether it's wall or if it's boards, it's all there. And it's very similar to the makeup or the actual layout, the way DRS's gym is set up. And maybe that'll allow them to play with a certain, use certain tactics that, maybe TABC might have trouble adjusting to. However, with that being said, you're also looking at the following, which is that something that TABC has that DRS doesn't is I would say as we'll start getting to the individual teams, is the loaded talent or the extreme talent on offense. Now, these two teams play very different styles of hockey. With TABC, they're going to try and outscore you. And with DRS, obviously, when I say outscore you, I mean, obviously every team's going to try to outscore you, but TABC is going to try to blow the doors off you offensively. They want to put up 10 on you every single game. And their defense, I don't want to say is lacking because they have good defensive personnel, but they try to they think the game so much more offensively than defensively that they get caught up sometimes. With DRS, it's all about defense first. And DRS has 4 lines that they can comfortably roll offensively. However, it's the defense that they're known for. It's how they've won every single game that they've won this year. And even the one game they lost, they only gave up 2 goals. And when you're looking at it, you're thinking, you think to yourself, well, this team has 4 lines that they can roll comfortably on offense. They have 3 consistent lines that they roll on defense, or 3 lines they roll consistently on defense that can all suffocate any offense. And that's really what the story was against TABC. They made sure they played defense first, and this was during the regular season. In that regular season game, DRS won 5-0. That DRS came out and made sure that they were able to pound on TABC defensively, not allow their offense to get going. And DRS was able to use that defense to create offense. And eventually, it slowly ended up, bleeding out, I would say, for TABC, where they just couldn't find any way to get their offense going against a suffocating DRS defense. And, they never let them get going. And that was really the key. Now, DRS has given up the least goals in the league, but TABC's offense, as I've already mentioned, while they might not be as deep or they might not roll as many lines, is definitely the more talented offense. Name-wise, you're looking at Shea Fields and Matis Kraus, who have both been excellent for the Storm. And that's just, and on their second line, you're looking at Ben Sion Kaiser and Aiden Rausman. Aiden Rausman had 4 goals in the semifinal game. He had a natural hat trick in under 5 minutes beginning the semifinal game. So this is a team that can really come out and score. Those individually might be the best 4 forwards in the league. And then on their third line, if they get there, you're looking at Akiva Mattel and Ezra Alter and a rotation of Ari Herman. That right there, if you're going to talk about those 7 forwards, outstanding. The plethora of offensemen they have is absolutely unbelievable. They're deep, they're talented. They all do a little bit of everything. They're all fast. They all have skill. They all have great shots. They all communicate. And they all play the TABC way. There's a lot of motion. There's a lot of, there's a lot of movement, and all in all, that's what TABC has done so well this year, is just go out and outscore teams. And on defense, you're looking at Aryeh Simon, Jonathan Brothman, Aryeh Izekowitz has been rotated in a little bit more as of late, and it was only a matter of time until he fully got going. Ethan Moskoff, who in his second year at TABC after playing his freshman year at Frisch has again been a huge piece for the Storm. And Max Borger, who's been able to come back after having torn his ACL a couple of times and missed every single year being able to play so far. 9th grade due to COVID, 10th and 11th grade due to injuries. But this year he's come back, he earned himself a C, being a captain, for all the guys respecting him for coming back after not being able to go through it physically the last few years. And for him to come back, make the comeback he has, and been a huge part for them on defense, has been absolutely incredible for them. And in net, they've had the ability to play a tandem. As I've mentioned in previous episodes, they've had Shia Forgash and Amichai Dresner. Dresner was the starting goalie for the most part during the regular season. Forgash saw some time in glimpses, maybe in games that they were already up big, and then you pull the goalie and, give your backup some time. But Amichai Dresner, before the SAR game, actually ended up with an injury. And as a result, Shia Forgash ended up in net. Played the game against SAR. He was fantastic. And Mo Fuchs, the head coach for TABC, decided to play him against Hank in the second game. And Shia, again, was magnificent. So right now, we're actually going to see Shia Forgash in the championship game, which is a different story than what we saw in the regular season because Amichai Dresner started that game for TABC against DRS. And Shia Forgash, statistically, in his Yeshiva League career against DRS, has played them twice as a starter, and he's won both games, including the championship game last year, where he gave up one goal and earned himself co-MVP with Aiden Rousman right after the championship game. And I interviewed him, and he got to talk a little about what the journey was like for him. So he is not exactly a stranger to territory like this. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with the way he handles things, the way DRS maybe decides to attack TABC, if they change their game plan from anything offensively like it was before when they played TABC the first time in DRS. And it's going to be interesting. With that being said, let's talk about DRS now. On the DRS side of things, I mentioned 4 lines of offense that they can roll out consistently, and they've done it all year long. And it starts with Moshe Aryeh and Jack Greenbaum. Since being paired together, they were initially split, but since being paired together, which was about midway through the year, I think it was their first game against Hank, which took place at DRS, and they scored the first goal of the game like 10 seconds in. They have been electrifying. They both bring speed. They're both responsible defensively, so they have great two-way games each. And on top of that, they've gotten timely goals, and they've scored big goals. I mentioned they scored that goal a couple seconds into the game against Hank. That was a big game. They scored the only goal against Frisch in the 1-0 game at Frisch during the regular season that they won. They scored the first goal of the game against Rambam in the playoffs a couple seconds in. That line combined for both goals against Frisch in the semifinal game. Moshe Aryeh and Jack Greenbaum were the only line that put the ball in the net against a good defensive, or really all around. I already talked about Frisch having a high-powered offense, but yeah, Frisch was a really good team this year. DRS, that line of Moshe Aryeh and Jack Greenbaum was the only line that ended up scoring on them. If you look at both games, they scored a total of 3 goals on Frisch in 2 games this year, 1 in the regular season, 2 in the playoffs. And they had the 1 goal in the 1-goal game against Frisch early on in the year at Frisch. And they had the 2 goals, both of them belonging to Jack Greenbaum, Moshe Aryeh picking up assists on both of them during the semifinal game. And that line has been absolutely outstanding. They can go out there and neutralize any line. Doesn't matter who you're going up against or who they're playing against. Secondly, I don't want to shy away from guys who have done it from previous years, either on the varsity level or who were impact players on JV last year as well. Guys like Yitzi Uden, Max Pakris, Ben Ritter, Ariel Rogoff. They've all been rock solid for this DRS team, and they've been able to go out there and really just all play the same way so they can all play with each other. We've seen different line combinations all over the place for DRS, but it's always been the same 6 to 8 forwards rotated in, and they've always found a way to put the ball in the net. They've always gotten positive results. And on top of that, they're all responsible defensively. Now let's talk a little bit about their defense. DRS is the best defensive team in the Yeshiva League. And I'm not saying that, with the intent of bringing offense to anyone else, but they simply are. They've given up the least goals in the league during the regular season and the postseason. And that includes any team that played less games in the playoffs than DRS did. And DRS is about to play their 3rd playoff game, and they've only given up a total of 3 goals. So they have been absolutely outstanding. And, that's not really a shock. That everyone knew that was going to be the strategy for this DRS team. It's always been the strategy for this DRS team, where their motto is, we're going to hustle, we're going to play hard, and that's, that's all around, but we're going to suffocate you defensively. I was talking to Larry Gross before the JV semifinal game between Hafter and DRS, as I'll talk about later. And I asked him why, for example, he moved Josh Lampert, who was known to be an offenseman before, back onto defense. And he said, because I always think about, or the first thing I think about is who's going to give you the best chance to keep the ball out of your net. It really shows defense first. Defense is what wins championships. It's what won DRS a championship over this same TABC Storm team 2 years ago on the JV level. And DRS has, again, a plethora of defensive players. Both of these teams as a whole are just super deep teams, but DRS on offense and defense consistently rolls their players. And you're looking at some combination of lines because they've shifted those around all year long, but you're looking at a consistent 6 names of Isaac Spector, Daniel Cinnamon, Nathaniel Lawrence, Micha Khan, Jake Frankel. They've all been so rock solid. And Ellis Bornstein, excuse me, I forgot to mention, who's been on and off for them this season in terms of how active he's been able to play, but he's back after dealing with a shoulder injury in the first round of the playoffs. He played the semifinal game against Frisch, and he's back for the championship game ready to go. So you're going to see those 6 names consistently rotated in on the defensive side of things. And again, they can all play with each other. They don't change their style of play because they don't need to. Finally, moving on to their goaltending, Daniel Austin, who won the championship MVP 2 years ago and didn't see all the work last year as a junior, but saw more of it down the stretch and in the playoffs. Although he didn't take DRS to a championship or even the championship last year, he's gotten them there this year. He has been absolutely outstanding. And he's really, again, I mentioned DRS has given up the least amount of goals in the league this year, if you include the playoffs as well. And he's a really big part of the reason why that's been the case. Always been a solid goalie, a guy you can rely on. He plays a big goalie style. But with that being said, you can't look away from his athleticism. He's got a great glove. He was excellent in the game against Frisch. He needed to be, especially with the fact that even though I said DRS is a defensive machine, they were outplayed in that game. And Daniel Austin was really the reason why DRS ended up walking out of that game as the winners and moving on to the championship. Now, if you go back a little bit in time and you want to talk about these teams' history, I will break it down for you real quick. The last time TABC was in the Varsity Championship was 2 years ago. It was 2022. They lost to Frisch. The last time they had won the Varsity Championship, you got to go all the way back to 2016, when that all-time team of Daniel Levy, Yoshua Naor, Kalev Minsky, Yair Noller, all of those guys, Shua Balin, that all-time team, those guys, the seniors on that team only lost a total of 4 career games of Yeshiva League hockey, playoffs included, and they won 3 championships. Now, on the other side for DRS, you're looking at a DRS team that hasn't been to the championship on the varsity level since the 2020 year. And that was the year that they were crowned as co-champions because the coronavirus pandemic just, it broke out and it shut everything down. And whoever was in the championship game, that was DRS against Ramaz. They were just crowned co-champions. The year before that was the most recent year they were in the championship, but they lost to the Frisch Cougars in overtime. The last time they won a championship was the 2017 season. So a year later than TABC. But at that time, one of their current coaches, Andrew Giller, was a senior and was the captain of that team. So it's been a long time coming on the varsity level for both of these teams since there was a single championship won. And that makes this a very interesting matchup, and all in all, it's going to be a great game. I'll put it to a prediction because I did do that earlier in the year, or really just last week for Yeshiva League Pass. You guys might have seen me go on Yeshiva League Pass's Instagram story and give my prediction there, and I'm going to keep it all the same. I said 3-1 DRS at that time, and that is exactly what's going to stick. That was also before we knew who officially was in the championship. There were still semifinal games left to be played. So with that being said, now that we have our official matchup and it's TABC against DRS, my prediction will be 3-1 DRS. And with that being said, it's going to be a great game. I do think that there's definitely a chance TABC could pull off the upset, but DRS against TABC, I already mentioned it to you, TABC's style of play is that they're going to go and try to outscore you. And that's great, and I'm not saying they can't defend, but I am telling you that DRS's focus primarily is to play defense and to make sure the ball does not get put in the back of their net, and defense wins championships. And that is the reason that I'm picking the DRS Wildcats to defeat the TABC Storm in the Varsity Championship on Sunday, March 10th at Frisch. So 3-1 DRS is my final prediction for the Varsity Championship game. I'm looking forward to an absolutely incredible and exciting game. Hopefully it's going to be an incredible and exciting game. It was 2 years ago when these two teams met on the JV level, and it was a 1-goal game. I'm hoping that, obviously, if I can predict the score correct and the outcome correct, that'd be great. But all in all, I just want to see a great game. I'm sure the rest of you guys and all of you guys want to see a great game, and I'm really looking forward to it. Hopefully you guys are as well. With that being said, let's move on to JV now. So I already mentioned we're going to do JV second because that is the game that takes place second in the doubleheader between these two teams. So let's move on to the JV championship. So this year in JV, we have the DRS Wildcats against the SAR Sting. And this is an interesting one. The last time the DRS Wildcats were in the championship was last year. And as a matter of fact, it's their third straight appearance in the JV championship. However, the last time that SAR was in the championship, similar to DRS and Varsity, was the 2020 year where the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic, broke out and it started spreading and it shut down the league. And as a result, SAR had made it to the championship, but they were crowned co-champions along with TABC. The last year they went to the championship on the JV level before that was 2015. And they won that game. They defeated the Rambam Ravens 7-6 in a thriller. I was there. I was an 8th grader at the time, and I went out. I had already enrolled in Rambam, so I went to go check it out. It was a really exciting game. It went back and forth, but 7-6 was the final. And that was the last time that SAR won a JV championship. So I mentioned they're in the championship for the first time since 2020, and the first time they'll have a chance to win it single-handedly since 2015. So let's talk a little about SAR first. So SAR is an absolute powerhouse this year. They come in as the 1 seed. They went, they had 9 wins and only tied 1 game. So they didn't, they don't have a chance at a perfect season, but they do have a chance for an undefeated season. And they are the favorite coming into this game. SAR is led by their first line offense of Jack Linhart and Nate Zitter. They have both been outstanding all season long. And their first line defense consists of Ellie Fenster and Eitan Adler. All 4 of those players were key contributors last year on the JV level as freshmen for an SAR team that went to the semis against DRS. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I go along in the SAR. SAR is a very deep team. However, they're a very deep team and they have a lot of talent. However, it's not just the sophomores that have been that lead producers for them. I already mentioned, they're 4 of Eitan Adler, Ellie Fenster, Jack Linhart, and Nate Zitter. But they've gotten great play from everyone. That includes their freshmen as well. I do want to mention real quick before I get to the freshmen, Natanel Sadi has been a big transfer piece from the 10th graders, the sophomores on this team, and he's been outstanding for them. He helped set up the goal in the semifinals, which was the game winner against Frisch. However, on the freshman side of things, they've gotten great contributions from players like Jonah Neowitz, Atin Katler, Jack Duche, and those 3 guys have been regulars in their lineup who consistently have been producing for them this year. In goal for them, Michael Goldman has been rock solid for them all year. He gave up just 5 goals during the regular season, and he's always doing what he needs to do in order for this team to win. Something that I really want to talk about is that a lot of times, whenever you have a team that's dominating teams left and right, and SAR has really been almost unchallenged by anyone this year. I just want to say that, a lot of times, if you're the goalie for that team, you're not always going to see a ton of pressure. And I think that actually makes your game harder because you need to be able to just pull it together out of nowhere when you might not be, I don't want to say not as focused, but, not as consistently in the actual play. And sometimes, a shot can catch you there, but he's always been on his guard. He's been rock solid. Goldman has been a very strong goalie for SAR. And with that being said, when there's not a ton of pressure, I just mentioned, it can make your game a little bit more challenging sometimes. And considering you might drop your guard, he's been able to keep his the entire season long, and he's been really, really good and just a great backbone for this SAR Sting team on the JV level. Now let's talk about DRS. So I mentioned DRS is in the championship on the JV level for the third straight year. They're also a deep team, and they consistently have rolled out 3 lines on offense, and they've also been able to roll out lines consistently on defense, you know. However, if there's one thing that I'm going to point out that's very clearly different between these two teams, it's that DRS doesn't have the same level of high-end talent that SAR has. However, don't let that fool you, because they still have players that can put the ball in the back of the net. And even though the numbers might not necessarily tell you so as much as they do for SAR, and even so, they also, even though the numbers might not tell you defensively in certain cases, I think that they are the better defensive team, the best pure, play defense defensive team in the league. With that being said, Josh Lampert, Ami Marks, and Zevi Fuchs have been a 3-headed monster for this team on the back end. I've already mentioned all of them in the last episode. I did the playoff picture and the playoff preview episode when I spoke about DRS. I mentioned those 3 guys. Josh Lampert's making the transition, as I mentioned earlier, from offense to defense. And the reason for that, Larry Gross, their coach, said that he looks at who's going to help them keep the ball out of the back of the net first before they're able to start scoring goals. And he said Josh Lampert's a player that really does that for them. There's a reason that he was given an A this year, a reason he's an alternate captain on that team. And he has done an excellent job transitioning from offense to defense. And he's been able to contribute offensively, being able to join the rush and still being able to play the game he likes to play, which is to get involved and bring up the ball and take, far range shots and test the goalie's vision, and to still be able to get involved in the offensive side of things as a defenseman really just shows his ability and his talent level. Now, with that being said, they've also had contributions from players like Shua Fogel and Sam Goldstoff. And Sam Goldstoff, just something I want to highlight, had the game-tying goal for DRS in the semis against Hafter. And that was a very exciting game. I was there. Hafter went up 1-0. DRS tied it at 1. Then Hafter went up 2-1. And it was going down to the wire. And Hafter was playing a 1-2-1. And they had DRS right where they wanted them. DRS could not get anything going. They had moved Josh Lampert up to offense, and it wasn't working. They had moved Ami Marks up to offense with him, and it wasn't working. And eventually, Sam Goldstoff takes the floor, a guy who had not seen as consistent minutes throughout the regular season as he had started to see down the stretch of towards the end of the regular season and in the playoffs. And he put in the game-tying goal. Sometimes it just comes out of nowhere. And this was a case where it did, but, props to Sam Goldstoff. He was able to get that game-tying goal, and it ultimately is what kept the Wildcat season alive. It came with just a couple minutes left in regulation, and, game-tying goal sends the game to overtime. DRS eventually gets the overtime winner and marches on to the championship. So Sam Goldstoff has been a big piece for them, at least at the very least in the playoffs. And we could definitely expect to see a lot of him in this game against SAR. Other than that, though, other freshmen, as I mentioned, SAR has had, equal play from their sophomores and freshmen contributions wise. DRS has also gotten some big performances from freshmen. I mentioned Sam Goldstoff had the game tying goal in that game. Well, Eitan Rogoff actually had the game tire when it was 1-1 and the overtime winner. So all 3 goals for DRS in their semifinal game came from freshmen. Ozzy Hershkowitz came in for DRS and also filled a gap with David Schindler being out for a little bit. And he was really effective in his few shifts that he played in the semifinal game. We can expect to see a lot of him in this championship game as well. And then finally, I want to talk about the goaltending for DRS, who we weren't exactly 100% certain on because they had 3 potential options. They had Daniel Wogelenter, they had Eitan Goldris, and they had Max Isaacs. Eitan Goldris in his sophomore year transitioned from player to goalie, but he's been a good goalie for them whenever he's got the chance to play. Max Isaacs was the starting goalie in Halb last year, went to the championship, but lost in double overtime, but another solid option. But Daniel Wogelenter was the backup goalie in his 9th grade year on last year's JV DRS team, which lost in overtime in the championship. And he spent time learning under Josh Papilski, and he has done a great job for them this year. He is really a big part of the reason why DRS got to the championship game. He had an outstanding game in the semis. He kept them in it when they were down. He never stopped, and he had to make some really tough saves against a good Hafter team. And with that being said, he's been the backbone for DRS all season. They haven't doubted him, and his only real blemish on the year, I mean, DRS did lose twice during the regular season. They lost 2-1 they lost 1-0 at home to Hafter. He had an outstanding game. It was just the one goal. And other than that, his only real blemish on the year, I would say, where he was completely outmatched, if you want to put it that way, is the SAR game. Now, that being said, as I was just about to get to, SAR did play against DRS during the regular season. The two met about mid to just past midway through the regular season at SAR. Now, this game is going to be played at Frisch, and that is a neutral site. That's, the obvious being stated there. But the other thing, as I mentioned, similar to Varsity, how that floor might favor DRS more than it does TABC, because DRS plays in a gym more similar to Frisch than TABC does. It's the same thing here on the JV level. SAR plays in a very small rink where the ball very rarely stops moving. It gets cleared. It doesn't really get cleared out of play. There are some weird ground rules there for the way, play gets stopped. If it's not covered, if a goal is scored or if there's a penalty being called, it doesn't really leave the rink or leave play very often. But with that being said, in Frisch, it can. And the gym models DRS more than it does SAR. And I think that gives DRS an advantage. With that being said, I am still leaning a little bit more towards SAR because, as I mentioned, SAR just all around, I mean, they're a powerhouse. They have it all. They have offense, they have defense, they have great goaltending. I'm not saying DRS doesn't, but I think that they're a little bit more talented, and can match the level that DRS has shown. And they showed it earlier on in the year when they played DRS and beat them, and they shut them out 3-0. Now, with that being said, I'm also going to put this one to a prediction because I did it for Yeshiva League Pass as well earlier on their Instagram story. And I said 2-1 SAR in overtime, and I'm sticking to that. But again, similar to the way I said, it wouldn't shock me if TABC pulls off the upset because they're the underdog in the Varsity Championship. DRS is the clear underdog in this JV Championship, and their experience could get them there. Remember, a lot of the freshmen from last year's DRS team did not see heavy minutes, but they did see time the same way that we've seen it sort of boil up this year for their JV team and the freshmen on this year's team, even though they have more this year that are contributing at the moment than they did last year that did. But the 10th graders this year who were freshmen last year on DRS have taken a real nice step leading this team. And I mentioned Zevi Fuchs, Sami Marks, Shua Fogel, Josh Lampert have all been a part of that. On the SAR side, most of these guys did the bulk of the work last year. You're looking at Jack Linhart, Nate Zitter, Eitan Adler, Ellie Fenster, and that right there, and Michael Goldman in net, that's a big deal for SAR, being the sense I said DRS has done a nice job transitioning, but SAR comes in with, I think, more, playoff or, competitive experience for those specific guys and this overall class that we see that they have. And so for those reasons, I'm still going to take SAR over DRS. The final score I'm predicting will be 2-1 in overtime. And it's going to be a great game. There's no doubt in my mind that both the Varsity and the JV Championship are going to be incredible games. I hope that's what we're set up for. It looks like that's what we're set up for. And all in all, it's going to be an incredible time. So be sure to tune in to the game on the live stream, which will hopefully be posted on the MYHSAL link. If you go to the schedule and you see the games, normally there's a link that says the word watch there. If you click on it, it should take you to the link for the live stream. And if not, hopefully you'll be able to be there for the doubleheader. It's going to be two great games. Just want to remind everyone again, the Varsity game takes place first at 1:30, and the JV game takes place following it at 5:30. Varsity game between the TABC Storm and the DRS Wildcats, and the JV championship between the DRS Wildcats and the SAR Sting. May the best team win. That's the simplest way I can put it. And finally, I want to thank everyone for tuning in to this episode of Yeshiva League Pass Faceoff. And again, reminding all of our viewers again that we are sponsored by the Weiselberg Law Firm. Please choose wisely.